The ancient Greek secret to never gold, proven by science. What if the real cause of male pattern baldness was discovered 2,400 years ago? By accident? Long before modern science, a Greek doctor noticed something strange about the king's guards. Men who had been castrated never went bald, ever. For centuries, nobody understood why. But today, modern science has confirmed he was absolutely right, and what the ancient Greeks accidentally discovered may completely change how we treat hair loss today. Most men think balding is random, unavoidable, or purely genetic. That's not actually true. Science now shows hair loss follows a very specific biological pathway, one that can be slowed, targeted, and sometimes even partially reversed. And strangely enough, ancient Greek habits were already influencing that pathway thousands of years before finasteride or minoxidil ever existed. From diet to scalp rituals, the Greeks were unknowingly using techniques modern dermatology is only now beginning to fully understand. The reason most men misunderstand hair loss is because they think the problem starts on the outside. They blame shampoo, hard water, hats, stress. Well, maybe even genetics alone, but modern dermatology now understands something much deeper. Male pattern baldness is primarily a hormonal and inflammatory process happening underneath the scalp long before the hair actually disappears. And the ancient Greeks somehow were already interfering with that process thousands of years ago without even knowing the biology behind it. Let's go back to the real villain in this story, DHT, dihydrotestosterone. This is the hormone that slowly miniaturizes hair follicles in genetically sensitive men. Your body creates it when an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase converts normal testosterone into a much stronger androgen. And here's the important part. DHT is not bad. You actually need it. It plays roles in male development, libido, body hair growth, and several other biological functions. The issue is sensitivity. Some men inherit hair follicles that overreact to DHT, especially around the temples and crown. Over time, those follicles shrink more and more with each growth cycle. The hairs become thinner, shorter, weaker, until eventually the follicle stops producing visible hair entirely. Cool. That's why male pattern baldness happens gradually instead of overnight, and this is exactly why the Greeks' lifestyle becomes so interesting, because several of their daily habits targeted inflammation, circulation, oxidative stress, and DHT activity all at once, starting with diet. Now, one of the biggest myths online is that there's some magical single food that cures baldness. That's nonsense. Hair loss is multifactorial. Whoa. But nutrition absolutely influences the environment surrounding your hair follicles, and modern studies are proving it more clearly every year. The 2018 Italian study mentioned earlier found something incredibly important. Men who regularly consumed raw vegetables and fresh herbs had dramatically lower odds of male pattern baldness. Not slightly lower, roughly 50 to 57% lower. That's massive, especially because researchers controlled for family history, age, body weight, and other variables. Now, why would herbs and vegetables affect hair? Because hair follicles are highly metabolically active structures. They're extremely sensitive to inflammation and oxidative stress. Think of follicles almost like tiny organs constantly cycling between growth, rest, and shedding phases. When inflammation increases chronically inside the body, follicles become weaker and more vulnerable to hormonal damage. And modern Western diets create the perfect storm for that damage. Ultra-processed foods, high sugar intake, excess refined carbohydrates, poor omega-3 balance, chronic insulin spikes. All of these increase inflammatory signaling pathways linked to androgenic alopecia. That's the scientific term for male pattern baldness. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean diet, especially traditional Greek-style eating, does almost the opposite. Olive oil provides anti-inflammatory polyphenols. Fresh herbs contain antioxidant compounds that protect cells from oxidative damage. Fatty fish supplies omega-3 fatty acids, which help regulate inflammatory responses. Vegetables increase micronutrients and improve vascular health. It's not one magical ingredient, it's the entire environment being shifted in a healthier direction. And here's something most people never think about. Hair follicles need blood flow. A lot of it. Every strand growing from your scalp requires oxygen, nutrients, hormones, signaling molecules, and cellular energy delivered constantly through tiny blood vessels. When circulation worsens or inflammation damages that environment, follicles struggle. That's one reason chronic smoking, poor cardiovascular health, metabolic syndrome, and obesity are all associated with increased hair loss risk in multiple studies. The scalp is not isolated from the rest of your body. It reflects what's happening internally. Now this is where rosemary becomes fascinating, because unlike random internet hair oils, rosemary actually has legitimate clinical evidence behind it. The 2015 study comparing rosemary oil to minoxidil shocked a lot of people, because minoxidil is considered one of the gold standard pharmaceutical hair growth treatments. Yet, after 6 months, rosemary oil produced statistically similar improvements in hair count. That doesn't mean rosemary is automatically better, but it does mean something extremely important. Plant compounds can influence hair biology in measurable ways. We and researchers believe rosemary works through multiple mechanisms simultaneously. First, improved microcirculation. Rosemary appears to help increase blood flow in the scalp, improving nutrient delivery to follicles. Second, anti-inflammatory effects. Compounds like carnosic acid help reduce oxidative stress inside tissues. Third, and this is the big one, rosemary may mildly inhibit 5-alpha reductase activity, the same enzyme targeted by finasteride. Now obviously, rosemary is nowhere near as powerful as prescription DHT blockers. But many men are specifically looking for gentler interventions with lower side effect concerns. That's why rosemary's exploded in popularity online recently. The science supporting it is actually real. But consistency matters massively here. Hair cycles move slowly. Most people quit treatments way too early. Human hair grows in cycles lasting months, not days. That means even scientifically validated interventions often require 3 to 6 months minimum before visible improvements happen. And this is where social media completely destroys people's expectation. You'll see fake 30-day regrowth videos everywhere. That's not how biology works. Real follicular adaptation takes time. Now let's talk about something even more underrated: mechanical stimulation. Scalp massage sounds almost too simple to matter. But the Japanese study on dermal papilla stretching completely changed how researchers think about it. When you physically move the scalp tissue repeatedly, you create mechanical tension on cells surrounding the follicles. Those cells respond biologically, gene expression changes, inflammatory signaling decreases, growth-related pathways become more active, and suddenly something ancient starts making scientific sense. Because remember, Greeks massaged olive oil into their scalps constantly, not as a hair loss protocol, just as part of daily life before training, after training, during bathing rituals for centuries, and accidentally, they may have been creating the exact kind of mechanical stimulation modern studies now show can improve follicle health. Now, does this mean scalp massage alone regrows a full Norwood 7 bald scalp? No, we need to stay scientifically honest here. Advanced follicle miniaturization becomes very difficult to reverse naturally, but early stage thinning, stabilization, improving hair quality and density, those outcomes are much more realistic. Especially when multiple evidence-based interventions are combined together. That's the key most people miss. Hair biology responds best to stacking improvements, reducing inflammation, improving circulation, supporting nutrition, managing stress, potentially lowering local DHT activity, stimulating follicles mechanically. No single intervention works like magic, but together, the cumulative effect can become very powerful over time. And strangely enough, ancient Greek culture accidentally combined almost all of them already. Now here's where this conversation gets really interesting, because once you understand how male pattern baldness actually works biologically, you stop falling for 90% of the nonsense sold online. Most hair loss marketing is built around desperation, miracle oils, secret shampoos, 7-day regrowth, instant follicle activation. None of that is how human hair biology works. Hair follicles are living mini-organs operating on slow cycles controlled by hormones, inflammation, blood supply, genetics, stress signaling, and cellular energy. That's why real hair recovery is usually gradual. And honestly, well, that's actually good news because gradual systems can often be influenced. Now let's talk about something modern science keeps finding over and over again. Stress. Not the fake stress caused your hair loss overnight, claims people throw around casually online. Real physiological stress, cortisol dysregulation, sleep deprivation, chronic nervous system activation, these things absolutely affect hair biology. When your body remains under chronic stress for long periods, blood flow prioritization changes, inflammatory markers rise, recovery systems weaken, hormonal signaling shifts, and hair follicles are extremely sensitive to those changes. This is one reason Mediterranean cultures historically showed lower rates of several chronic inflammatory diseases. Despite lower access to modern medicine, their lifestyle wasn't just food. It was slower eating, better social connection, more movement, more sunlight, more physical labor, less ultra-processed food, less chronic overstimulation. The body doesn't separate stress from health the way modern people try to. Everything connects. And this is where olive oil becomes more important than most people realize, because extra virgin olive oil isn't just healthy fat. Real high-quality olive oil contains polyphenols like oleuropein and hydroxytyrosol, compounds heavily studied for anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. And animal studies have shown oleuropein may even stimulate pathways involved in hair growth activity. Now, obviously, we need to stay careful here. Mouse studies are not human clinical trials, but combined with the broader evidence surrounding inflammation, circulation, and Mediterranean dietary patterns, the picture becomes pretty compelling. Greece. The Greeks weren't using olive oil because they understood molecular biology. They used it because it was embedded into daily life. And accidentally, many of those habits aligned perfectly with maintaining healthier scalp environments. Hey, now here's another important point most people completely misunderstand. Hair loss prevention and hair regrowth are not exactly the same thing. Preventing miniaturization early is far easier than reviving follicles that have been dormant for years. Think about it like muscle loss. Keeping muscle is easier than rebuilding years after complete atrophy. Hair follicles behave similarly. That's why early intervention matters so much. If someone notices mild thinning, increased shedding, or temple recession early and immediately improves scalp health, inflammation, circulation, and DHT management, outcomes are often dramatically better than waiting until large areas are completely smooth. And this is where men psychologically sabotage themselves. A lot of guys ignore hair loss completely for years because they don't want to think about it emotionally. Then suddenly one day they panic and search for miracle cures after major follicle loss has already happened. The earlier you act, the more biological tissue you still have functioning. Now, let's address finasteride and dutasteride, honestly, because this conversation always becomes emotional online. These medications are currently among the most scientifically validated treatments for male pattern baldness. That's simply true. They reduce DHT by inhibiting 5-alpha reductase activity, the exact pathway we discussed earlier. And for many men, they work extremely well, but they also come with legitimate side effect considerations that some men are uncomfortable with. That's why natural approaches have become so popular. The key is understanding the difference between natural support and pharmaceutical potency. Rosemary oil may mildly influence DHT activity. Finasteride reduces serum DHT dramatically. Those are different levels of intervention. Scientifically speaking, the strongest evidence for halting male pattern baldness still belongs to medications like finasteride and minoxidil. But lifestyle interventions absolutely influence the biological environment surrounding hair follicles, and combining multiple supportive habits together can create meaningful improvements for many men, especially earlier in the process. Now let's bring this back to the scalp massage findings because this part honestly fascinates researchers. The dermal papilla cells sitting underneath each follicle behave almost like biological control centers. When mechanical tension is applied repeatedly through massage, gene expression shifts in measurable ways. Some inflammation-related genes decrease, certain growth-related signals increase. And suddenly, something ancient becomes modern science again. Because think about what the Greeks were doing daily: warm olive oil, direct scalp manipulation, sunlight exposure, physical activity, anti-inflammatory diet, low processed food intake, fresh herbs, fish rich in omega-3s. And unlike modern people, constantly overstimulated by stress, screens, sleep deprivation, and processed food, their biology operated in a completely different environment. Now, obviously, ancient Greece wasn't some magical utopia. People still went bald. Genetics still existed. But what's incredible is how many of their natural habits accidentally aligned with pathways modern dermatology now studies intensely. And honestly, that should change how we think about hair loss entirely. Because most people approach hair loss reactively instead of systemically. They search for one product, one shampoo, supplement, one trick. But biology rarely works that way. Healthy hair usually reflects overall physiological health working together. Circulation, hormonal balance, inflammation control, nutrition, stress regulation, and sleep quality, scalp environment, and yes, genetics. Genetics absolutely matter. Some men inherit extremely DHT-sensitive follicles and will still lose hair despite excellent lifestyle habits. We need to stay honest about that. But genetics are not always destiny in the absolute way people assume. Why? Gene expression and disease progression are influenced by environment constantly. That's one of the biggest discoveries modern medicine keeps confirming again and again. Now here's the most practical way to apply everything we discussed without becoming obsessive about it. First, fix the foundation: Mediterranean-style eating, more whole foods, more vegetables, fresh herbs, healthy fats, fatty fish, less ultra-processed junk, less sugar overload. Second, improve scalp circulation and stimulation. Daily scalp massage, 4 to 10 minutes minimum, consistently. Third, use evidence-supported topical support if you want. Rosemary oil, diluted properly in a carrier oil. Patch test first, be patient. Fourth, protect recovery systems, seep stress management. Exercise, because your follicles are part of your body, not separate from it. And finally, be realistic. Hair biology moves slowly. Anyone promising overnight transformation is usually selling fantasy, not science. The men who actually improve their hair long term are usually the ones who commit to consistent habits for months and years, not days. And honestly, there's something powerful about that, because underneath this entire conversation about baldness is a bigger lesson most people miss completely. Your body constantly reflects your daily habits over time, not one day, not 1 week, years. And somehow, 2,400 years ago, the Greeks were already noticing pieces of that puzzle before hormones, enzymes, or genetics were even understood scientifically. That's what makes this story so fascinating. A civilization without microscopes accidentally discovered one of the central mechanisms behind male pattern baldness simply by observing the human body carefully. Then through diet, oils, movement, and ritual, they unknowingly built lifestyles that targeted many of the same pathways modern medicine focuses on today. That's incredible when you really think about it. And maybe the biggest takeaway here isn't just about keeping your hair blue. It's about realizing how deeply connected lifestyle and biology actually are, because your scalp is not isolated from the rest of your body. It's responding to everything. What you eat, how you sleep, how stressed you are, how inflamed your body is, how healthy your circulation is, how consistently you take care of yourself. That's the real lesson modern science keeps rediscovering over and over again. If this completely changed the way you think about hair loss, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been struggling with thinning hair or male pattern baldness. And tell me honestly in the comments, what surprised you more? That the Greeks discovered the hormonal cause of baldness past too, 400 years ago, or that modern science is now proving many of their daily habits were actually working.